Stephen, thanks for finding the time to talk to us. This is a very important year for St. Canice's, indeed for Kilkenny City and County. Can you talk me through what's planned?
Ray, it's lovely to talk to you. It's a big year for St. Canice's Cathedral, actually, as you say, for the city. It's the 700th anniversary of a formative event in the life of this place, which is the Alice Kittler witch trial. Over my right shoulder, there is buried one of the early bishops here, Bishop Ledred, someone whose name is quite well known. Ledred did many things, but one of the things he did was he decided to bring to justice someone in the city whom he thought had perhaps escaped the law. A lady called Alice Kittler, who had 4 husbands, all of whom died not long after contracting holy matrimony. The civil authorities could do nothing, but Bishop Ledred, unperturbed by such niceties, had her charged with heresy and witchcraft. Now, she was well connected. Her brother-in-law was the Lord Chancellor, so he arrested Bishop Ledred, and there was quite a spat back and forward over a number of years. In the end, Alice escaped, but her maidservant Petronella de Meath was not so fortunate, and she was burned at the stake in Kilkenny, the first person to be so burned in these islands. And this is the event that we as a city are going to commemorate this November. The anniversary is the 3rd of November. We are planning a festival across 3 days, taking in the cathedral, the castle, Roath House, where some of her relatives lived, and also other places associated with the Kittler family. There will be an act of worship here in the cathedral at which the preacher will be the Bishop of Meath. It will be an ecumenical service as we try to think through those events in light of, I suppose, a more modern sense of sensibilities, looking at questions of power, the role of women in society, and looking at what was not perhaps the finest hour of the Irish Church or of the Irish legal system.
Now, of course, worshipping has taken place on this site for, 700 years or thereabouts, give or take?
Absolutely more. This cathedral itself was started here behind me in 1205. It replaced an earlier cathedral, but it was in the 600s that Canice came here to establish his church. And it is the place that gives Kilkenny its name, Kilkenny, Kilcanis, the Church of Canice. So it really is ground zero for Kilkenny.
And do we know why he selected this particular spot?
It's hard to know. He was already well established at Ahabo, where the centre of the sea had been. And I think this was one of the last holdouts that had not, where the gospel had not been brought. And Canice was not the sort of person to take that sort of thing lying down, or the sort of person who decided that he had done enough and would rest on his laurels. So he came to Kilkenny, he founded a small community here, and for several hundred years it remained small. It remained insignificant until it was decided in 1111 that the centre of the diocese would move to Kilkenny and a cathedral would be built. And it was around that time as well that our round tower outside was built. It's one of 2 that you can climb in Ireland. There's a fantastic view out from the top of it, and it became a sign that Kilkenny was on the rise. And we know that, and sorry if this is a little bit indelicate, from excavations of the latrines, because when the community started to become a little bit more prosperous, more important, they started to eat meat. And they can tell that through the archaeology, roughly when the Round Tower was built.
So you've all that background, all that great backstory. You've got ecclesiastical development on this site. You also have massive political intrigue involving these 2 frightfully important but fearsome characters.
You do, and a lot of this is reflected in Ledred's writing as well. Ledred is someone who came in to really knock the see into shape. And he kept a journal of all his works in the Red Book of Ossory. And we're delighted that next month in July, the Red Book of Ossory will return to the cathedral to be put on exhibit. And people can see Ledred bringing canon law. He said that any cleric who had a mistress had had to put the mistress away within 30 days. We don't know where they all went. He had music written for the choir in his own hand. He wrote Latin poetry so they wouldn't sing the bawdy songs out of the local taverns. He had the first record in Ireland of the Magna Carta, and crucially, and only for medicinal purposes, the first recorded recipe for whiskey anywhere in the world. So we're delighted to bring those things back, because part of our mission here is actually not to be inward looking, but to look out, to welcome, to throw the doors open, to give a greater sense that St. Canice's Cathedral is somewhere that belongs to everybody in Kilkenny city and county. That if you are a Kilkennyite, this is your cathedral. You belong here. It's part of your story. And any day that someone comes through the door that has never been through it before is a great day.
The Red Book of Ossory is a very important piece of documentation. Where does it sit in the grand scheme of things?
It's of international significance. It is rated alongside the Book of Kells. It is somewhat different in that it doesn't give of its charms quite as readily as the Book of Kells. Apart from its very famous red binding, it's not perhaps quite as colourful, but it is considered to be just as important. In the story of Kilkenny, it is up there with the Liber Primus, and certainly it brings together so many strands of Kilkenny life and so many important aspects of our story. So we're hoping there will be interest from Kilkenny, national interest, but also international interest over the next year when the book is here in the chapter house.
We're right smack bang in the middle of this grand and great building. Talk me through some of the more outstanding architectural features of St. Canice's Cathedral.
Well, what I'm going to do first is tell you about one that is not outstanding in the slightest. In fact, it is so humble and so modest. At the various points of our tumultuous history, Cromwell didn't even think to get rid of it. And yet it is one of the most important things we have, St. Kieran's chair. It was brought here when this became the cathedral and the centre of the diocese, as a sign that the authority of the bishop and of the diocese was moving to this place. And it was built into the north wall. And the bishop is still, when the bishop arrives, is enthroned, is placed in that chair as they take up the temporalities of the see. It's just the stone underneath that is ancient, that is from the 6th or 7th century. The seat and the arms are relatively modern. They're 13th or 14th centuries. Barely worth talking about. So that is crucial.
And I take it there's a cushion for the bishop.
No, because a bishop's seat ought to be uncomfortable. It is a really good metaphor for the role. So no cushions, no comfort, nothing like that.
So he hopes for a short service.
Well, he hopes for a short service. He's generally quite involved in the service as well. So a certain amount of toing and froing. And there is, the Victorians had pity on the bishops, and there's a very modern, large, elaborate throne in the choir as well. But certainly bishops at different points have chosen to sit in St. Kieran's chair. There's also a tradition that the Catholic Bishop of Ossory, on their first visit to the cathedral, would be seated in that chair. A recognition that the bishopric of Ossory has got a long and a shared history to it, and that we are committed to only doing apart that which we cannot do together.
And of course, we're here in front of one of the most magnificent stained glass windows I've seen.
It's beautiful, and it is both in one sense the oldest and in one sense one of the newest windows that we have. It was put in during the time of Bishop Ledred, and at that point the papal nuncio asked whether the window could be purchased and taken back to the Vatican. Ledred refused, but gave the nuncio permission, he was a keen artist, to sketch it. He sketched it and presented the sketches to his patron, the Pope, instead of the actual window. Maybe not a great substitute, but some centuries later, when Cromwell took the cathedral and stationed his horses here, before he burned it down, one of the things he did was he knocked out the east window and all the stained glass windows to melt them down to get the lead for shot. Not the best use of a sacred artifact, but some centuries later, when the cathedral had been restored, the Butler family in the castle, one of the marquises, got the original sketch out of the Vatican archives and had the original east window recommissioned according to medieval principles of stained glass, using old techniques and to the original design. So it is the most authentically old window we have in the cathedral, whilst being relatively recent.
It's absolutely splendid. It's wonderful.
Every time I stand and look at it, I see something else. It rewards a bit of study, as does the cathedral as a whole. The various tombs that are around here, the medieval passage tombs and slab tombs, are fabulous. There's always a little detail you just didn't notice before. There is a lovely tomb I'll point out to you that shows a pot with a chicken jumping out of it. And there is a wonderful story that, having just betrayed Jesus and got his silver, Judas went home to his wife and she asked him, "How was your day, dear?" And he said, "I've betrayed Jesus and I'm terribly worried because there's a prophecy that he will come back from the dead." And she said, "Don't worry about that in the slightest. You've got the silver. There's more chance of that chicken jumping out of the pot than Jesus coming back to life." At which point the chicken upped and out of the pot and ran across the kitchen. And that is a story that hails apparently from Ethiopia, and yet it is here on an early medieval tomb. So the connectedness of places like Kilkenny around the Christian world is something that's quite remarkable when you sit and encounter it carved in stone.
How big an attraction is St. Canice's Cathedral for tourists who come to Kilkenny? Maybe not necessarily expecting to find these jewels.
We love to have the cathedral open to tourists and visitors, and everyone who comes through, whether they are here as a worshipper, a tourist, a pilgrim, a traveller, they're made welcome. And they find in here something, we hope, of the peace and the presence of God. People come for all sorts of reasons, for concerts, for events, and we hope that there is something of the liminal in this space. It's a thin space. The air between earth and heaven is at its thinnest, and God is very present here. But I think that people, when they come and they encounter this, they are surprised. Even people who have lived all their lives in Kilkenny might not know some of the gems that are here. And it was one of the things of lockdown when we all had our staycations. People came, visited the cathedral, they climbed the round tower, they saw this gem of their hometown that they'd never necessarily seen or experienced before. So we're always encouraging people from far afield, from across the island, or from 2 streets away to come in and to see this fabulous medieval cathedral.
Your enthusiasm is very evident. It's very obvious. You're only here a very short time. Is this the best job you've ever had?
It is. I'm only here a wet week. I'm just here 2.5 years, so I am the new dean. I'm told that I will be the new dean for at least 20 odd years. I'm happy to be the new dean. I don't really want to start getting called the old dean. New is better. But it's a fabulous place. There's something different to discover all the time. There's wonderful choral music. We have a very active choir and director of music. There is in the city also St. John's Priory, where I minister, and 2 churches in the countryside. The fabulous Church of St. Lachlan in Freshford, which is much older than the cathedral. And then there is a First Fruits Church called St. Aidan's in the village of Kilmanagh, with a very committed local congregation there as well. So there is infinite variety. There's many, many things going on to keep me a busy but a happy dean.
Now, you're a very proud Oma person.
I am, yeah.
Is it fair to say that you're now a very proud Kilkennyite?
I hope that the people of Kilkenny will accept me as one of their own, and the signs are positive and looking good. I'm not all that well versed in the ways of hurling yet, but my daughters are telling me all about the camogie that they're doing at school. So I think once I can get my head around the rules of that, I'll get well on my way to becoming a local.
Dean Stephen, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.